Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from Thomas Fehlmann, Los Lagos. Thomas Fehlmann is a German producer who's been around for quite a long time and has worked with lots of people over the years, ranging from Holger Hiller and Moritz von Oswald, while in the band Palais Schaumburg, among others, to producing Erasure's self-titled album. But I've known him for quite some time myself, thanks to his being one of the most regular contributors to The Orb. Now, I hadn't actually heard any of his solo work outside of The Orb, which is why this video exists, but being such a long-time Orb fan myself, I do know that he has an unmistakable style and sound that you can nearly always identify. Whenever he's contributed to an Orb project, you can typically tell when and where specifically. There's even a whole album that's so heavily focused on his sound. It's his own solo album, that being Okie Dokie It's the Orb on Compact here. His sound has always had a lot of German dub techno, some occasional hip-hop, and lots of ambient elements as well. That could end up a little maybe soundtrack-ish at times, like really old soundtracks though. It's kind of hard to describe, but his particular choices of synth tones and rhythms is really distinct to him. Now, recently it was announced that Fehlmann was going to break off from the Orb's live setup so that he could focus on some more of his own solo work, and just a few weeks ago dropped this new solo album, so I figured this was the perfect opportunity to explore his solo catalog. Only just listen to his main studio albums. I know he's been involved in a lot of stuff over the years, including a couple of collaboration albums, but I just heard the 7 main ones under his own name, including this newest one. So I'll quickly go down his solo discography so far. Little collection of some bright, lively, fluffy ambient house that happens to sound a lot like The Orb for whatever reason. Shocker, right? Also enjoyed this album a lot from front to back. Worth checking out for sure. I think this is just B-sides to the previous album. That was better and more cohesive than this was, but this is neat too though. This is a fairly low-key and straightforward dub techno release that follows his trademark sound. Pretty good. Bit more of a glitchy hip-hop edge to this one, not super exciting from front to back, but definitely has its moments. Sound-wise, this honestly didn't give me much to say that I couldn't also say about his other projects, but it is really solid. I'm told this is a soundtrack to a documentary of some kind, and despite many elements being directly pulled from Okie Dokie It's the Orb on Compact, this album was beautiful and I definitely recommend it. Which brings us to here. So, I'll admit that these solo albums haven't provided me with a wealth of insight into his style and sound. I think this mainly solidified things I already kinda suspected, and the 6 albums here all sound relatively similar, with not a lot I can say about each individually, but they were all really enjoyable, especially Good Fridge and Gute Luft, which were my 2 favorites. I did have a pretty good idea on what to expect in terms of the kind of sounds and aesthetics he'd use. That's remained pretty consistent, but so, anyways, what specifically did we get with Los Lagos? Well, I will have to first come out and admit, I don't think this is one of my favorite of his solo projects. It's probably his most simplistic, most stripped back and minimalistic offering to date, and I tend to prefer the stuff of his that has a bit more texture to it. But that said, I do think it's a pretty solid release anyways. Very subtle stuff here, but I think it works well for what it is. Very straightforward dub techno that is still recognizable as his own style. That does make this album kind of a difficult one to review since there's really not much to say about it. The first 3 tracks on here are all structured very similarly. Not a lot of melody, but it's fairly standard techno formulas, executed well, each track slowly evolving and changing over the course of 8 minutes. Of those first 3, Window is probably my favorite, as I think it's got the coolest atmosphere. But yeah, anyways, there's a track with a guest feature here in Tempelhof with Max Loderbauer, or however, sorry for butcher pronunciations as per usual. I do like how this track changes things up a bit with a bouncier 6-on-the-floor beat, though for the most part it follows the same formulas as the other tracks, and I'm not entirely sure what the guest brought to the table aside from making it sound a little less like Thomas Fehlmann, I guess. I do think the second half of this album is stronger than the first half too. Like, maybe the track Triggerism doesn't really stand out to me aside from the title, which I don't really care for. But the other 3 tracks are among my favorites, especially Neverevernever, which is a brief return to Fehlmann's more ambient-centric style, combining the techno structures of the rest of the album with a beautiful pad of synths and guitars that sounds amazing. The melodic elements of Freiluft and Geworden are very nice as well. But as far as individual tracks go, that's about all I have to say. In terms of the album as a whole and my personal enjoyment, I will admit this isn't the kind of album I personally see myself putting on regularly. As I mentioned before, I tend to be more of a fan of Fehlmann's more textured ambient-centric work that does more in terms of sound design. This feels a bit basic in comparison. But as a techno album, there's really nothing bad I can say about it. Despite the lack of specific interesting things I have to say about it, it's hardly a basic or formulaic album. Formulaic by his standards. It just sounds like his formulas, but, you know, it's still not that basic. Because all these tracks stretch on for a long time, 6, 7, 8, almost 9 minutes sometimes, and even though there's technically not a lot going on at any given point, I'm at least kept interested the whole time. No groove ever gets stale, each track evolves and changes enough over the course of their running times to justify their lengths and hold my attention. It's just a very well put together and executed techno album that sounds like Thomas Fehlmann. I won't act like it's going to be one of my personal favorites of the year or anything. It doesn't really ascend to a higher level for me, but I will say any big techno fans out there ought to give this one a shot if they missed it. It's some solid stuff. I'm overall feeling a solid 7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.